Welcome to Inform New Hampshire. My name is Dean Kern. I'm the host, and to my right is Richie Merritt, my co-host. And we have a guest, Pat Murphy, who's been here a number of times. We love having him here. He's a fantastic historian and a great teacher, and we'll get to him in just a moment. We are broadcasting on Manchester Cable 23, Channel 23, and we are our show runs on Monday evenings, Thursday mornings, Saturday and Sunday in the morning also. We have a YouTube channel called Inform New Hampshire and a Facebook page, and also Inform New Hampshire. Please drop by there, and you're welcome to watch any of our shows there. Like us and subscribe if you will. We also, Richie and I are state coordinators for the National Liberty Alliance, and we believe the National Liberty Alliance is in pursuit of a remedy for we, the American people, to restore the common law grand juries to our system. They were stolen from us back in 1946 through a legal footnote. And that common law grand jury is the tool that has historically always been used all the way back to the Magna Carta 1215 for we the people to manage and control our government servants, to be able to root out corruption and to stem back the tide of every government which always encroaches on the people's rights and liberties for their own self-interest and for their own preservation. So, nationallibertyalliance.org. There's a great training course there called the Civics course. There's also a constitutional course. Feel free to do that. We also want you to know that on July 11th at the Milford VFW, Veterans of Foreign Wars in Milford on July 11th, 6:30 p.m. will be Chris Ann Hall. Chris Ann Hall is a fantastic orator, advocate of the Constitution. She's going to do the genealogy of the Constitution. So in an hour and a half, you'll learn more about the Constitution than you probably have your whole life. Please join us. Bring your family, friends. Kids are welcome. It's going to be a great event. We can fit over 200 people, so bring them all. Once again, that's July 11th at 6:30 p.m. at the VFW in Milford. Today we're going to talk a little more history. We're going to pick up where we left off last time with Pat. But before we do that, I want to turn it over to Richie and talk about our political prisoner friend, Jerry DeLamus, and take it away.
Yeah, just one thing on July 11th, though. Be there at 5:30. I think Chris Ann's going to speak at 6:30.
There you go.
But try to be there at 5:30. We're going to try to make it a very fun night, educational and fun. Yeah, back to Jerry DeLamus. We're still asking for people to support him. He's having a hearing Monday. And hopefully we have petitions here. If you want to get in touch with either Sue or Jack Kimball out in Rochester, if you know him, you can get a petition, sign a petition for him to help him get out. Other than that, if you can donate money to him for his legal aid, please do so. Go to www.patriotjerry.com and contribute what you can. I know him and his wife will appreciate it. And we ask this every week. We don't know who's watching. We have new people or whatever, and Jerry's being railroaded, so we'd like to help out. And the other thing, very briefly, one of the main reasons that we ask Pat Murphy to come on this show is because of his knowledge of history. And I hope that you share this video, especially with the younger generation. I believe that the history they're teaching today is tainted at best. And to hear Pat's perspective of it, because he's an extremely knowledgeable man on the subject, is going to enlighten them. So please share this video. I would like to see that. I mean, not for me, for your children. Share the video. Thank you, and I'll turn it over to Pat.
What you got for us, Pat?
Thanks a lot, gentlemen.
Yep.
And I think we'll just call this Average Guys History and Political Commentary, because we're average guys trying to make a difference. We don't come with the great imprimatur from Harvard, Yale, and Princeton.
No, we don't.
You don't have to. You don't have to, believe me.
I know that.
You're the one spewing the garbage.
I know. Our view here is that they really need to start to educate the younger people, because, you know, in politics you either have numbers of people or you have money to try to influence events, and it looks like if things don't change, you'll lose a whole generation of younger people, especially what's going on in the schools. They're being cut off from all of their history. And in fact, you can take a look at what's going on in Europe, and a lot of the historians you're producing now have a whole different view on Western civilization and on geography and on all the different national groups. It's almost as though they're trying to wipe out the idea of the nation state and get the younger people to believe that everything should be merged together. I mean, you can look at guys like Sarkozy, and he's literally telling you who you have to mate with. He's literally saying, immigrants coming in, that's who you have to marry. And it's, you almost fall off the couch watching some of this stuff. It's absolutely unbelievable. So, if anything, to bring about the change that we need, it's got to start at the local level. It's got to start with the mothers and fathers. They have to demand real education in their schools early on. I taught high school way back, ancient history, in the 1970s for about five years or so. And at that time, there was a lot of academic freedom, and I was given the freedom to design courses. And I know for a fact that a lot of that's changed. So there's a lot of pressure on teachers. You still find a lot of pockets of brilliance. In fact, I was speaking with somebody that is very, very young, 10 years old, and she was actually studying Shakespeare. And I said to myself, how did you find that? And she said, stimulating, which is tremendous. I was saying, the young people, they should look forward to going to school, and they should look forward to building on a base of information so that they become decision makers. Because the whole political agenda, and make no mistake about it, there is a political agenda, is to get people to the point where they cannot make an informed decision. They're eradicating all of history. You go back to ancient Rome and you read Cicero, and he'll say that a person without a knowledge of history is a child forever. And what you're watching is you see infantilization of the nation. They're being made dependent and not able to use logic. They have no base to proceed from. The last time we were here, we were talking about, very briefly, inside of the 20 minutes we get or so, the Russian Revolution,
Right.
the Russian Civil War,
Yep.
the Soviet invasion of Poland in 1920, which nobody talks about. That war, which was so crucial to affecting the history of Europe and the tremendous thing that Poland has done, and the things that country has done throughout its history are just, they're monumental. They have stood at the gates of Europe protecting Western civilization and Christendom for centuries. You think about the Turkish invasion of Europe in 1683, and it's literally the Polish army that changed the outcome of that battle at Vienna, because the next target would have been Rome. The entire history of Europe would have been different.
They've been made to look like the bad guys, though, in some of the history.
Well, something that's true. It's very, very hard to find something. If you go back and you look at any of the films in the 1950s and 60s where you had Eastern Europe, underneath the Soviet rule, a lot of that war against the Soviet Union, a lot of the effort was made by the Poles, and yet you can find almost nothing where you have Polish heroes standing up to them. And you begin to look at cinema, you begin to look at how it was influenced. Poland, if you look at them as a country for producing soldiers who are phenomenal, Air Marshal Dowding literally said that the Polish 303 Squadron won the Battle of Britain. Literally, those Polish pilots that had escaped after Poland was conquered were just tremendously effective in that battle. And you watch their efforts in the Second World War. It's amazing. Their intellectuals on the mathematical side are the ones that broke the Enigma code that probably is the greatest factor in the winning of the Second World War. And when I was a kid, I always wondered, because we listened to all this Polish joke stuff, and I said to myself, where's this coming from? It has to be coming from someplace. Mm-hmm. And then I can remember in the 80s, the late 70s and 80s, when you began to see all the rifts in the Soviet Union and in Eastern Europe, they would look to Poland, for leadership. And I remember the Pope coming out, I think it was John Paul II, it was in St. Wenceslas Square, and he was saying, don't let them tell you who you are. You know who you are. And what he was talking about was the element in modern totalitarian dictatorship where they will institutionalize self-disrespect within a nation. You can see that in Dr. Zhivago. When you read Pasternak, he says, they taught us to hate what we loved and love what we hated. And by doing that, they were extracting the desire to stand against what they were doing. So I can think of one great example from Poland in the Second World War. There was a captain. He fought in the Russo-Polish War of 1920. He was decorated twice. His name is Witold, W-I-T-O-L-D, Pilecki. And this guy volunteered, after Poland was invaded in September the 1st, 1939, and within a couple of weeks, Polish army, they did what they could do against a horrifically equipped German army. They collapsed, and Pilecki volunteered to try to get arrested and to go into Auschwitz, which he did, to collect information on what was going on. And with 3 others, he escaped shortly thereafter and tried to bring that information. He did bring the information to Britain, to Churchill, and you could see almost nothing happened where he said he was willing to go back and organize resistance. You're talking about probably one of the bravest guys of the Second World War. And then as the war goes on and Germany loses and the Soviet Union's coming into Eastern Europe, Pilecki will fight in the Battle of Warsaw against the Germans, and shortly thereafter retreat, and then from a free zone he'll volunteer under General Anders to go back into the communist-occupied Poland to try to garner information. He'll be arrested and then later tried, and he'll be murdered by the Polish communists. But if you ever see that name, that is the Poles had so much going for them in terms of bravery and leadership that it's almost beyond imagination. It's just a tremendous country.
I got a question, Pat. You mentioned earlier about, I think you did, correct me, the documentary on the Battle of Warsaw?
Yeah, there's you could look up. There's a producer. It was Jerzy Hoffman, and it's called the Battle of Warsaw, and it's a romance too. It's a good movie for adults, and it shows that whole conflict. And in fact, it'll show that priest. His name is Ignacy Skorupka, who led university students outside of Warsaw, because most of Marshal Pilsudski's troops they abandoned Warsaw to try to envelop and split Soviet forces. And a lot of those young kids they're trained at the last minute, and when their leadership faltered, that Catholic priest led that attack. He was killed. But they always produced tremendous individuals like that out of the Catholic Church in Poland, and their history is undeniable. But they have such a sense of pride that was the one thing that the Soviet Union always worked on in that country. One of the good movies you could look at was one of my favorite actors was Ed Harris, and he played the role of a Polish communist KGB official. And they were trying to quiet down a diminutive Catholic priest by the name of Jerzy Populescu. And I made a movie on this. And eventually, it shows a crisis of conscience that he has, and they eventually murdered him. And he was just an enormously powerful individual. What he did with this whole movement for freedom in Poland. And the funny thing was, I remember reading one of the magazines that comes with the Sunday paper, and it had Ed Harris and all the movies that he had ever done, and the one movie that was airbrushed out of there was that movie. It was just a great movie. So you have got to, that's why I say you have to educate your kids yourself. You've got to do that, and you have to get a handle on things, and it really needs to begin right off the bat. Now, the last time we were together, we mentioned the murder of Nikolai Vavilov. There's the book right there.
Right.
That's a $6 book. That's a tremendous book. And it's a great story, and it deals with an individual that was a great individual in Russia, who was a genuine humanitarian, who was involved in the environment. This guy's the guy that had a seed laboratory, 250,000 different types of plants, and could have done an awful lot, but didn't fit in with the political agenda, and was pushed out by the Bill Nye type guy, Trofim Lysenko, who went on to be head of everything agricultural in the Soviet Union. Was really, really a charlatan and a quack. But a read like that is great for anybody. You're in the middle of the same thing now with your global warming. So
Right.
now, we're trying to construct this whole thing in a short time on
Yeah.
developing our historical mindset. Did you have a question?
No, but I just was thinking about the similarities of what you said they did with this guy, who was a brilliant scientist mind on agriculture, plants, and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
Simply because he didn't fit the agenda, they replaced him with some other guy, who was a complete idiot, right?
Mhm.
Told people to plow 5 feet deep, and
Right.
I mean, we were talking about this earlier before the show, and and it popped into mind of how similar that is to global warming, because global warming is a
Right.
complete hoax,
Mhm.
but yet there are those who are so converted to the idea of global warming as though it's the truth, and that they would be willing to persecute others for non-belief. And that's the culture that's being breeded right now in our society, and it is as probably maybe more sophisticated than it was back then, simply because of the propagation of media now can certainly be more widespread and more effective, I think,
Mhm.
than maybe back then. However, I'm not sure because I wasn't around back then.
The
Maybe
diff-
there was
the
fewer
diff-
sources of information back then. So
The difference between now and then is that these people, all right, they turn their back on this individual because it's a question of life and death.
right,
In other words, anybody else associated with them, if they're a scientist involved in agronomy, they were told, you need to write a position paper advocating what Trofim Lysenko says and denouncing Nikolai Vavilov. Or you know what? You're going to be in a gulag, or you're going to be dead. The difference today is anybody on this side is it's largely about money and grants and
livelihood
careers
and tenure.
and
I mean,
careers,
careers,
and,
yeah.
and things like that.
no, there's a woman I know that found historical remains of humans that, number one, there's all kinds of remains of humans all over our country that are giants. Lincoln spoke about it in one of his inaugural addresses, referring to the giants in our lands. And then there was a woman that found these remains, and she, of course, the Smithsonian Institute takes all those types of archaeological
Yep.
finds and says that they're going to preserve them and take care of them, but then they disappear, and they're nowhere to be seen on our information front. And this woman was ostracized from the entire industry that she was in, which was archaeology. So that's just an example. I wish I could quote her name, but I don't know her name. But there's plenty of examples of that throughout our society, and all of them operate under that sort of a spell. And that's why you have professors that are so easily indoctrinated, is because they're under that spell of control. And
Sure. You think of, like, if you look at what we talk about here, and what we should talk about is eventually is look at American, French, Russian revolutions, and then a general picture of Western civilization. Okay, because we're concentrating on particularly important things, but there's a much larger picture that we're going to have to look at. Now, when I was younger, and I always questioned things, and I was always hoping to have somebody very knowledgeable that I could trust teach me history, and it just simply was not there. But when I was a youngster, I was interested in the whole period of the 20th century, from the First World War through Versailles, through the rise of Nazism, the Soviet Union, and generally, when you looked at professors, top colleges in the 1960s, they all took the same line pretty much in regard to the Soviet Union. They're what you call revisionists. They looked at the Russian Revolution as Lenin as an idealist that had to do some nasty things because people forced his hand, and then Stalin coming to the fore and then taking the socialist bust on the wrong route. And nothing could be further from the fact, but there were two professors, two of them from Harvard, that were tremendous, and they were truthful, and they were courageous, and they've stood the test of time. As we get into the archives for the amount of time that we did to see what happened, and that is the superlative historian, Richard Pipes, who was absolutely fantastic. And you'll look at Lenin as an absolutely human being, as the entire socialist communist program as being basically something that's evil and doomed to failure. And then the second historian would be Robert Conquest, who dealt mostly with collectivization, the purges, and the loss of life in the Soviet Union, trying to show how monumentally huge it was. It's just absolutely amazing. And you look at how they were treated in that time period, and they're treating like pariahs. Now, I can remember Solzhenitsyn, a great writer of the 20th century, coming to Harvard, and it was he was doing a commencement speech, and it went on for quite a few hours. And I think the Harvard faculty, a lot of them, got a very rude surprise. It's almost like he gave them, one at a time, brought them up and spanked them publicly, in that he was saying that a lot of the things put in his face were liberal writings from the university system, and that the major problem that you have historically has been the destruction of moral conscience, and that the liberal tradition in the modern academy has been greatly responsible for that. So he became persona non grata.
Right.
They didn't want to see him around. And even our government, when they would bring him to functions, they kind of hold him at a distance and go, here he is. And the guy was just he's a monumental writer. Every young person in high school should be able to read that, but they have to know. You have to have somebody that has studied this and cut through all of the different camouflages and veneers, and because you find stuff out there that is absolutely untrue. I'll give an example. When I was a young teacher and I was teaching history, I was teaching humanities, I had a fellow teacher approach me, and he handed me a book. He says, "You ever read this book?" And it was The Deputy by Rolf Harkuth. And I said, no, I'm not that familiar with it. And so I read it, and it was on the Catholic Church and its role in the Second World War. And it was very, very anti-Catholic, making the Pope out to be a bad guy and all of this stuff. And then it took me years and years and years later, and I found out the thing was it was actually written by the KGB. You have to know the source of information. Where do these things come from?
Can I say something to back up what you're saying, too? Is several weeks ago we did a show in Lincoln.
Right.
And I was taught Lincoln was, all-American, top guy, this and that. And at my age, to find out differently that this guy was a tyrant, he was one of the worst presidents we ever had. And they're making him out to be a hero. Well, our children are learning this garbage. And they need to know different. That's why Pat is here, and that's why you should spread this around and get more information. If you don't believe what I'm saying, check out the information that Pat has and what we're telling you. You make up your own mind.
They should pull up Dr. Thomas DiLorenzo, who's an economic historian, but deals a lot with the Civil War, cause of the Civil War, Lincoln, what he calls the whole cult of Lincoln. And you have other Lincoln historians that are pro-Lincoln that are great. There's another by the name of Jaffe, and in fact, he and Thomas DiLorenzo have a debate which is phenomenal. When you look at what some really first-class historians can do, and what a great field it should be.
Is that on YouTube? Or?
Yeah, you can get that on YouTube. Thomas DiLorenzo is a great guy. But to back up what you said, if you looked at Robert E. Lee, who was offered command of the Union. Now we're getting into the Civil War. If you look at Robert E. Lee, who was offered command of the Union armies, he said, "No, I'm going to stay with my nation," meaning Virginia. At the end of the Civil War, in a period of Reconstruction, on his deathbed, he said, "If I knew what was going to be done to the South, I would have died in the battlefield with all of my men." Mm-hmm. So there's more to it than the court narrative.
The South was right and the North was wrong.
I watched another one. I saw a major historian, what we call a court historian, just a couple of weeks ago, and he's a good historian. But of course, maybe their income's coming from a certain place or these certain publishers or there's a connection. But he was talking on the French Revolution, and he mentioned that there's 17,000 people that died in the French Revolution. I said, you're not even in the ballpark. I said, you have a whole enormous region there where there's a massive genocide against traditional Catholic peasantry that initially embraced the revolution, thinking it's an end to some of the parasitic laws, maybe a chance for some sort of written constitution or something. And when they see how horrifically anti-religious it is, how repressive it is, how it's going to demolish all the institutions in France. They pick up arms and defend themselves. And you have historians that will say that there are as many as 400,000 killed. I think probably the least I've seen is almost 200,000. It's a mass murder in the Vendée. It's called the Vendée. So you really you have to have a the educators have got to be educated. And unfortunately, a lot of the historians now are, and for years, there's simply been secular historians, and they don't understand the impact of everything you saw through Western civilization. I'll give you another example. You talk to any of these kids, and they'll say, "Oh, we're going to cover the cause of the Civil War. We're going to cover the Civil War. We're going to cover Reconstruction." And you're thinking, what have you learned from this? Mm-hmm. And can you defend? Can you take different positions on things? And they're getting just a little. They're getting a little smattering in there.
Sound bites.
Yeah, they're getting the sound bites, and they're not really getting a full comprehension of the way things were. I'm sure that there are good historians out there, and on the high school level and in that. But I say they're increasingly restricted in what they have. And if you look at the text, if you don't have a say on the text, then you're going to have a great problem, because a lot of them. If you go back, I look at some of the stuff that I saw, and I had a lot of freedom going way back in the 70s on what I could do and what I could bring in. It's different now. And a lot of the texts that they had there basically would follow United Nations, UNESCO-type program, where they would say, you don't teach anything that's really that uncomfortable. So you're not teaching the truth. It's like Alexander Solzhenitsyn says, if you're going to leave out part of the story, then it is not literature. You've got to tell the truth. So there has to be a way to deal with those things. And those books were they were very propagandistic, particularly in the role, the view that they had of the Soviet Union. And I could give you multiple examples on things. But how much time do we have?
We have almost no time, about a minute. I do want to thank you, Pat. Thank you so much. I wish we had time to sit here for an hour. But I trust that you'll keep coming back every other week or so, and we can keep this storyline going. And
I want to say one thing.
Go ahead.
I have an issue with this, and we're going to make a comment on this. This Brian Williams, this effete stuffed shirt with his statements on the United States and Hiroshima, we're going to do something on that.
Good.
We're going to teach something about that.
Get the truth out.
He's off the mark totally.
Yep, I appreciate that. People need to know the truth.
Well, my father fought in that war, and they're not going to besmirch their memory. They're not going to do it.
So we have, again, the National Liberty Alliance meets once a week here in Manchester. Anybody's welcome. I want to mention that Richie is running for the sheriff of Hillsborough County here. He is already officially on the ballot, right? Is that
as soon as I get my nomination paper signed, I will be, yes.
But he has registered and is running for sheriff in Hillsborough County. So for those of you who are registered voters in Hillsborough County here in New Hampshire, please consider your vote for Richie. He is a constitutional sheriff, very dedicated to the Constitution and enforcing the restrictions on the federal government as the Constitution does. Excuse me for my alarm. We're about out of time, so I want to thank you again for joining us. Please look us up on YouTube, and thanks again, guys. Have a great day.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.